This is a really exciting space today to debrief, to talk, to dive in, to process the first two sessions of our Power of Language workshop series. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to our host to sort of introduce today, and then we can dive in and go from there.
Thank you, Kyra. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beatriz Cantata. I use a she pronoun series. I'm the Director of Engagement for Diversity and Inclusion. Welcome. We'd like to begin by honoring the land in which MIT sits on. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land in which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. Thank you for joining us again this afternoon. If this is your first workshop with LEAD, welcome. If this is your second workshop, welcome back. And if this is your third workshop, woohoo, joining us for all three sessions. This is great. We'd like to, before I pass it on to Kyra Altman, who is the LEAD's co-founder and CEO, we have a special surprise for those who are attending. So Rachel will add to the chat a link to Uber Eats voucher. So we want to thank everyone for journeying with us. And this is our third and final session with this series. So thank you, Rachel, for adding that to the chat function. So hopefully everyone can access that. If not, please reach out to Rachel. And also, I want to thank Rachel for being our Zoom producer for this event. And I'll pass it on to Kyra. Kyra, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. And what an amazing surprise. I'm not surprised by the love and the support of MIT ICEO, but super grateful and excited for everyone to have a little surprise meal today or snack or whatever that might be. So with that said, we're going to dive in. What's really special about today is we're not here necessarily to learn something new, but we're here to process and talk and discuss and connect with one another in a very special, intentional way. So to kind of set that tone, as usual, we want to start off with a reminder to relax, reset, and refocus. So if everyone here can take 3 nice deep breaths, I would really appreciate it. So we're all going to inhale for 4, hold it for 4, and exhale for 6, and really slow down that exhale. So we're going to do it 3 times, starting now. Inhale for 4, hold it for 4, and exhale for 6. Inhale for 4. Hold it for 4. Exhale for 6. One more time, the deepest breath that you've taken today, the deepest breath that you've taken all week so far. Inhale for 4. Hold it for 4. And big exhale for 6. All right, now you can shake it out a little bit. You can stretch it out. You can move your body. I decided to also rep my former higher education institution today. So I have a nice G-dub here. I wanted to show everyone that. Go higher ed. And so next we're going to refocus. So with that said, we only have 60 minutes today. What do we want to get out of today? Please set an intention. Please really focus. Try not to multitask. I know it's so easy and so dangerous to do, but please don't do it because it will take away from what you get out of today's session. So with that said, again, this is a LEAD facilitated session and it's a debrief from the first 2 workshops that we've hosted that have also been recorded. So you can access those and talk with ICEO to get a hold of those if you weren't able to see all of them for one reason or another. With that said, also my name is Kyra. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I'm LEAD CEO, co-founder, and one of our main instructors. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you once again. So as usual, in case we have any new people or returners, I want to get to know the group that we have today. We have a group of about 48, which is a great small-ish size compared to the last few. So with that said, in the chat box, please give me your first name and pronouns. And there's a chart here to help you if you need it. You can also ask myself for help if that would be helpful for you. I'd also like you to tell me what your MIT affiliation is and try not to use acronyms because as we've been learning over the last 2 sessions, that can also keep people from really understanding what you're talking about. And then finally, I want you to share with us one remaining question you have or general feedback from the first 2 sessions with the rest of the group. So this is how we're going to start us off today as far as conversation. And thank you so much for that link. There's a link to all the recordings that was just posted into the chat. So I'm going to give you about a minute to kind of fill this out, send it in the chat box, and I'll read out a few that come in. And if you've never used pronouns before, that is okay. Again, feel free to use the chart or to ask me how to. All right. So we have lots of folks from different departments and offices at MIT. Awesome. Carolyn says, how to keep current on what language is considered most inclusive. Oh, that's such a tough one. And that is an ongoing challenge for sure. We also have, let's see. We have the wanting to from Shannon, how we can get more of our faculty and instructors to do workshops like this. So how do we engage them? How do we motivate people to come to these types of sessions? Because let's face it, if they're forced to come to it, you're going to get less of a benefit from that session. And we really want people to be intrinsically motivated to build inclusive communities. So how do we make that happen? Great questions. Let's see what else we have. Looking forward to pulling it all together with this session and solidifying some key learning. Awesome. Would like to see some resources on identifying microaggressions. Okay, so microaggressions, microinterventions, we can definitely include some information on that on the post-course resource sheet. We haven't gone into that too deeply yet because it just takes a lot of time and, sessions, but we definitely can in the future. Let's see, would love to review performance activism. So optical or performative allyship. Okay, definitely. What's the first step you recommend taking to start to incorporate these learnings into every day within my office? Awesome. So what we're going to do here is for any of the questions that we're unable to get to, we are going to do our best to respond to them in the post-course document. So for anything that's remaining, hopefully we'll be able to add those in and you'll be able to see those if we don't address it today. So what I'm going to ask you to do is when you fill out the post-course evaluation form later today, to copy that question in if it hasn't been addressed yet, and then that's how we'll be able to respond. But thank you all for sharing all these great things. Okay. Also, how to use inclusive language for social media posts. Gotcha, for awareness months. All right, friends. So we have a lot of questions, a lot of ideas, reactions, thoughts. Love that. And I'm just so grateful that you're here and taking the time out of your day to do this. An hour is not a small amount of time, right? It really is a big chunk of our day, and a big shout of appreciation to those who have actually given us even more than 1 hour over the last few weeks. So with that said, I'm going to keep us going, but again, please remember or copy your question somewhere else so we can bring it back up if it has not been answered at the end. Now, before we get into our actual debrief today, I did promise you at the end of last session that I would ask you about your homework assignments. So if anyone did these homework assignments, or if not, and you want to think about it right now, that's okay. But I'd like you to either put in the chat box the responses for number 1. So maybe tell us one topic area that you believe you need to learn more about related to DEI, or homework option number 2. So how you can actively support historically marginalized folks on MIT's campus. So if you want to give us a one-liner, one response, and you've done this or you want to do it now, I would really appreciate it. And just like the last few sessions, if you'd rather unmute yourself and share that way, you're welcome to. We would love that. Love hearing voices other than my own in these sessions. And Chris, having too many questions, I hear you. And you know what? That's a really great sign. That means that you're learning. That means that you're humble. That means that you're excited to keep that momentum going. So we love to see that as well. All right. Let's see. So learning more about Indigenous peoples and the Morrill Act implications, land grant universities, definitely. The higher education, the history of higher education as a whole is a very complex and obviously structurally racist history in many ways. Let's see. What are some other topics that you know that you want to learn more about? Intersectionality, okay. All right, I'm going to keep going for now then, but I encourage you to come back, revisit these as well. Now, I also wanted to revisit ICEO's mission statement. So on their website, right, we see that the ICEO shall lead MIT to make practical progress on a daily basis toward cultivating a caring community focused on MIT's shared values of excellence, community, equity, belonging, openness, integrity, and mutual respect. So now I want to kind of bring this back to you. We approached and we kind of actually broke down this mission statement in our first of the 3 sessions. With that said, now that you've gone through 2 complete sessions with LEAD, what feels different? When you read this again, or when you hear me read this again, has that mission changed for you? Are certain words sitting on you differently now? Or are you perceiving this in a different way? I want to really hear from 1 or 2 people a thoughtful response to how does this feel different now that you have learned how to apply inclusive language to everyday conversation and writing. So I'll give it about a minute. I'd love to hear from 1 or 2 people who can unmute and share with us. And again, this debrief is really all about you all, right? It's not about me and what I can teach you. It's about learning from each other, processing this together. So the more that you can bring energy and thoughts and perspectives, the better it will be. Keegan, go ahead. And please let me know if I'm saying your name wrong at any point, and I will correct myself.
My name is actually Kagan.
Thank you.
What came to mind for me was curiosity. I think I've been able to attend both prior sessions, and I feel like being curious really ties into all of this, right? It's like tying into really understanding where some of our language comes from. I know the first session we really talked about like common phrases, and I feel like now when I go to say them, the first thing that comes to mind is being curious about whether or not I even understand the history of those phrases. So it's brought that to mind, and I think curiosity around how to bring the change into my everyday life, both personally and professionally.
Thank you so much. And what I'm hearing from you is habit changing that's already happening, right? You're already getting that habit of stopping, slowing down to think about that language. Now, it doesn't mean that we're always going to be perfect and we're always going to avoid using phrases we don't know the history of. But over time, you start to have that inner voice that says, wait a second, I wonder what that actually means. And by the way, it's kind of fun in general to learn the history of these phrases because there are many without racist backgrounds that are just have a really funny story attached to them or whatever. So it's something fun to also get excited about. So awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share a reaction? Has any of this changed for you? Do you feel more connected to the ICEO at MIT overall? How does this session or how did this session impact you in a bigger way, big picture? And if not, we'll keep going. All right, friends, we'll keep going, but feel free to put it in the chat as well. Okay, so where we dove deeper in the last two sessions is really thinking about inclusion and belonging. Now, when we think about DEI, JB, or BJ, so we have diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. We focused in on inclusion and belonging because of how that relates to things like psychological safety and cultural humility and people feeling like they can bring their full authentic selves to MIT without having to leave parts of their identity at home. Now, with that said, what is the point of focusing on belonging and justice? The JB of that acronym is often forgotten about. And we have talked a little bit about how the justice and belonging piece interacts with inclusion and equity and diversity. With that said, right, why focus on belonging and justice at MIT? And how does that overlap with diversity, equity, and inclusion as well? Who can help me out here? Who can tie it all together for us? And feel free to put it in the chat box or unmute yourself. And if you don't understand a question too, feel free to just be like, Kyra, can you please rephrase? And I definitely will.
Yeah, could you rephrase?
Sure. Okay, so normally when we think about inclusion, we think about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is when everybody looks different, right, or is different. Equity is when everyone gets what they need, and inclusion is when everyone has a seat at the table. But where does belonging and justice come into this equation? After you have DEI, what's still missing at MIT? Why take a step further? As it's one what a microaggression is. It's another to have a student feel comfortable enough here to point it out without fear of repercussions. Correct. So what we're talking about here is proactive DEI versus reactive DEI in many ways. If we're thinking about belonging and justice, we're thinking about how can we proactively build a safe and inclusive community, not just because we have to or because we're told to, or even because a microaggression occurs, but in general, how can we be proactive about this within our community? And then I'm not going to say, I think Kagan, correct me if I'm wrong, is it Kagan? Says belonging could relate to feeling safe at the seat at the table. Definitely. So belonging and justice is basically not just having a seat at the table, but having your voice heard at the table, and even having someone stop to actually get your feedback on something before the meeting ends. So those are the types of things we want to think about here. Awesome job, everybody. Okay, digging deeper. Obviously, providing sessions like this, it's just the beginning to actually thinking about justice in the higher education space and at MIT. For example, are we focused on just diversity, equity, and inclusion within classrooms, or are we focused on the ability for people to attend and afford MIT? Are we focused on housing or food insecurity on campus? Are we focused on racism or discrimination that occurs on campus? So it's taking, again, that step further, not just making people feel safe, but actually fixing the structures and rewriting the story, changing the power imbalances so we can actually prevent needing to do all of this in the first place, right? And build a space and a community that has a foundation of equity versus of structural inequalities that we have now. All right, so with that said, we also have to understand how our personal identities, our cultural identities also impact our mental health. So when we don't have inclusion, belonging, or justice in a higher education space like MIT, individuals' mental health is going to be at greater risk. And that's because of certain stigma, that's because of a lack of access to resources, and so many other things that play a role in one's ability to succeed within a higher education community. So as we've talked about for the last 2 sessions, we really want to be aspiring to develop cultural humility and competency. And a big piece of that is having a desire to fix these power imbalances. And that's where that justice piece comes in. We also have a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation, curiosity, continuous learning, all of those big critical topics for us. And of course, also using the resources that we have. So going and seeking out some time to hang out with ICEO, right? And going and actually reporting microaggressions to the Institute Discrimination and Harassment Response Office, the IDHR at MIT. So actually using those resources, not just having them, but using them and working with them to make sure we create a safer, better space. So I want to really get into the tangibles here. Sometimes when we talk about these very big topics, it's hard to wrap our head around it. And so I want to ask you what these topics look, sound, and feel like. So for example, if I said I'm feeling happy, what that might look like is me smiling. It might look like me having energy. It might look like me feeling like I'm on top of the world and can do anything. So now I want to ask you, within the MIT space, what do diversity and cultural humility look like? Who can help me with this one? What do they look like? And feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. So cultural humility, that's the idea that we want to fix power imbalances. We want to learn for our entire lifetime. It's the idea that we can't be an ally, but we can consistently practice allyship. What does that look like on MIT's campus? Let's think really practically and tangibly here. I know you can do it. I believe in you all.
I think diversity looks like people looking diverse, looking different, you know, just the way that a group looks.
Definitely. And what are some other types of diversity as well? Maybe not even just physical appearance related.
Right, it could be economic diversity.
Ability, potentially.
Ability.
Okay.
I also add maybe like the artwork and other things that we prioritize on campus, like just what the campus looks like.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Awesome. And what about cultural humility? What would you see on MIT's campus and be like, you know what, that person is showing cultural humility right now? What would you be seeing, do you think? Maybe somebody educating themselves after they perpetrate a microaggression, right? Learning themselves about what was wrong with that and how to do better in the future. Or it could also be potentially an office that's hosting an event, doing some research or trying to form some partnerships with different organizations or students or people from certain backgrounds to make sure they're accurately representing those individuals in whatever cultural event they're hosting. So those are some practical, easy to see examples of cultural humility, knowing that we don't have it all figured out and this is a continuous learning process. It could even be attending sessions like this, right? This is literally in itself an example of practicing cultural humility and allyship because you're learning, you're practicing, you're making space and time for these topics. Let's go to the next one. What does psychological safety, again, that definition is basically showing up with your whole self, unafraid of other people seeing that whole self and then punishing you for that in some way, right? So not feeling like you're going to be punished for being your true self. What might that sound like by somebody at MIT? What could they say out loud in any situation that you would say, you know what, that person clearly feels safe speaking their mind or showing their identity without fear of consequence?
I'm struggling with some of these, Kara, because I'm thinking about some examples of situations where a community is rallying around a very solid progressive talking point, and everybody's jumping on, quote unquote, the bandwagon, as it were, signing petitions and circulating them and using campus listservs. And it's the progressive talking point. And then there is a relatively small minority of people who feel that they have to then be very quiet because their perspectives are absolutely being, shut out and closed down, and they don't want to be closed out of that progressive system. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be when, as a general rule, you identify with that progressive circle. So I don't know if that's an issue of cultural humility that's missing, or that diversity question, but it happens within very progressive circles. And so some of the things that you're touching on are really, I'm bumping on these a lot because I think that this is a problem that's very much within the community of people who are bending over backwards to be especially sensitive to, quote unquote, the other. And it's problematic for me, and I think for some people as well. And it's something that I'm not sure how to get into.
Okay, so help me understand a little bit more what you're talking about. Are you speaking to the challenge of potentially minority groups or groups that have a not popular opinion on campus and them feeling included within a more progressive community? Is that what you're speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I don't mind giving an example of, assuming this is a very safe space. When war broke out between Israel and Hamas, a lot of Jews who identify very strongly with Israel on campus went very much underground. And a lot of the language that was popping up around in very progressive circles that many of us identify very closely with petitions left and right, led by very, very strong and powerful and admired and deeply respected faculty members who are leaders and thought leaders, who would start with, I am not anti-Semitic, but, and with very, very, very strongly condemning not just political, but very anti-Zionist, anti-Israel language that becomes very, very isolating for many Jews. And some Jews signed on to this, maybe because they believe it, and maybe because they felt like it was the right side of the political, debate, for the correct side of the political debate. But it became a very, very difficult and alienating situation. And many of Jewish faculty, grad students and undergrads and staff, we really kind of just put our heads down and just tried to lay low. And it was a deeply uncomfortable and painful position. And it was all happening within very progressive circles. And it was challenging.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really appreciate the vulnerability. I'm also a Jewish individual. So, hearing this, I also have had similar experiences. I've seen similar things happen. So what I would say is, first of all, it's really, really difficult as somebody watching this all go down. And it sounds like you feel helpless. It sounds very...
Well, and I didn't mean to take over this whole, I don't mean to distract the conversation. It was just an example of, how some of these can happen within very well-meaning and well-intended circles.
So I actually think you derailed it at all, because I think what you're talking about really helps us dive deeper into what truly is inclusion and belonging, right? And a lot of times, even well-intentioned individuals who are very passionate about what they believe in and really think that is the way to go, right? Even them, they can be not inclusive to other people. So here's the thing, inclusion is not about, I will be inclusive to those who agree with me. Inclusion is inclusion of everyone. With that said, you don't need to agree to respect somebody either, or respect their existence, or know that they deserve human rights. So what I would say here, and this has been one of, I think one of my pet peeves from even my own college experience, was I always felt like higher education taught me and friends of mine to talk with people like us and not with people unlike us, right? And unfortunately, we're in such a divisive society right now where people just don't want to talk at all with other people if they don't agree, because we're so afraid it's going to end up in this flame of argument of whatever else. So what I would suggest here is really being able to dive deep into what is inclusion and what is tolerance, right, of other people, and how do we make sure that we are not pushing out other perspectives simply because we think ours is right, because that is what I think a lot of more progressive folks are actually aiming for, but they're not doing it with their own actions. So it does take both sides there. The other thing I would even mention is when all of that was going down, I also heard of many different college groups of both from both sides of the political issue who would actually come together for discussions and for you know, a round table with leaders and all of those things. Now that is truly inclusion and belonging, right? Because your voice is heard at a table of people who might not be like you. And again, you don't need to agree to feel heard, right? You can still feel heard without having someone say, yes, I'm completely on the same page with you. So what I think you're bringing up here is so, so critical to, I think, our society as a whole right now. It's even bigger than the higher education space. How do we connect with people? How do we encourage people to have dialogue that might have conflict in it? And most people right now are running from that because we're so exhausted and so stressed by everything else.
Well, and because the rhetoric itself becomes divisive when you start using political terms like, you know, colonialism and oppression and, you know, language that puts people on one side or another. It creates it creates obstacles to the kind of conversation, especially when, you know, petitions go out that you're either on or you're off. And that's something that works against the kind of dialogue that I think we're all talking about is so much more constructive, especially when it can be one-on-one. Sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone who disagrees with you. You can get a lot further than when a meeting or a petition goes out that calls anybody who disagrees a, you know, neo-colonial oppressor.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? If we go back to power of language as well, saying that this idea or this practice is oppressive or colonial,
genocidal,
right? Saying a practice or an idea or a thing, a structure is one thing, or even a statement that somebody says, that is something very different than telling the person they are this identity, right? By telling someone you are a blank, that is incredibly divisive. It's going to cause people to put up a defensive front, and you're not going to get any conversation or anything positive out of that. And also, that one person, what maybe they do have many behaviors or biases around a certain thing, but they still have many other pieces to them not related to this topic. So unfortunately, it makes us almost X out people or block out people from our life, which limits connection, which limits diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and actually makes us lose out on really special relationships that we could have if we were able to connect outside of that one issue or a few issues. And so I want to be very, I also want to just mention, right, there's also the side of this where it's like, if someone's views are making me feel like I don't deserve human rights, or I can't get what I need, or I don't matter, that is a whole separate issue. So I just want to also give some space to that and validate if someone's listening to this and like, well, yeah, but if you tell me that someone who's transgender is lying about their identity, right? Why would a transgender individual want to spend time with them or connect with them when they're literally invalidating their entire existence? So that's another level of this that still is important. And I don't want anyone to think that that's not also a real valid reason to set boundaries for yourself as well. Let me take a pause and read some of these comments to make sure I'm not missing anything, and then we will continue on. And I also welcome anyone else to jump in and join this conversation. It's a really, really great one that was started today. I'm glad that we're doing this.
I'll share. I interpreted Lori, what you were saying a little bit differently in terms of, and for me, the rub with inclusion is that we talk about inclusion of all, but I don't think we really want to include everybody. Like we're not looking to include those that we deem to be super hateful or to be, and so I always struggle with it's in like there is an extent to which that inclusion I feel like goes. And to Lori's point, I think in conversations that are often about different topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, there's a group that there's almost always a group that kind of feels silent at a certain point. And I do think, but I think the silence comes from this fear of being ostracized or excluded. And so I think the language piece can be helpful at bridging into those groups that perhaps feel that unsafe and so therefore aren't really truthful or honest or transparent about where they are authentic, I guess would be a better way to put it. And I think wrestling with that and trying to figure that out. And then through all of that, also trying to make sure that language doesn't become the deflection to the conversation that needs to happen. So also trying to make sure that we don't spend so much time talking about, well, what do you mean when you say this versus this, et cetera, that we never really get to the topic, which I feel like also sometimes happens because it's taking so long to just get to a shared terminology before engaging in the conversation. And so the work takes a lot longer, I think, than what we anticipate when we approach it from a place of humility. And when we're trying to avoid making assumptions and instead inquiring about, so you said this term, what, you mentioned colonizers. What to you does that mean? Like figuring out these different pieces. But I do think that the rub for me and the part that I always struggle with is it's inclusion, but not in its full, to me, it's not a full inclusivity. Like we're not looking to include people that espouse hate typically.
Right.
And so what does that look like? But
Definitely. And that's what I was trying to speak to too toward the end of that. And I think if somebody is entering a group or a space or a community who is hateful or whose actions and language are limiting inclusion, belonging, equity, all of those things, then they don't belong in an inclusive, they can't belong or exist in an inclusive space, right? So if their existence, if their actions or belief systems are directly preventing inclusion of other folks, that is it's backwards, right? It doesn't make sense within an inclusive space. So I think what you're saying makes tons of sense as well. So let's move on a little bit. Really great points, everybody. And I just want to also validate this stuff is so complex and so difficult and heavy, and it takes a long time to do. And as Jason just mentioned as well, to do it right, we really do have to slow down and be intentional and learn the terminology to be able to engage in these conversations. Nobody teaches us how to do this unless you go out of your way to learn. Okay. So I want to get to this next question, and we're actually going to do a breakout room to kind of close us out today. So I want everyone to answer, and you're going to have pairs or groups of 3, the question of what feels or is so difficult about changing our language, our patterns, and our habits, right? Change is difficult, and changing our language is even harder because this is how we communicate. This is how we express our needs and our desires and our personality, our identities. So what is so hard about that? And then as a follow-up, I want you to think about with your partners, what is one habit that you need to intentionally and regularly challenge from this point forward? So this is a very vulnerable question. This is a very deep question, but I believe in all of you. And I believe the first 2 sessions have laid the foundation for you to get to this next level together. So with that said, I will broadcast those questions again once you're in your breakout rooms. I'm going to invite you all to join them now, and then we will go from there. And please hang out. This is only going to be 2 minutes for each person breakout room. So it's going to be brief, and then we'll get back to some other closing conversations, but this is not the last thing for today. All right, you should all be invited to your rooms, and I will broadcast the question momentarily.
Oh yeah, I'm the host. All right, I'm going to join room 13.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. So what I'd like to do before continuing on is really just recap and take a second to debrief from that breakout room, because that was a really deep discussion you most likely were just having. So what were some takeaways, nuggets of wisdom, themes that you saw in your breakout room, or something that you think could really bring value to the rest of the group by sharing today? I will pause and let individuals unmute and share or put it in the chat box. Shannon, go ahead.
So our breakout room was still talking when they ended. But it sounded like there was we wrestle with oh my God, it's hard to keep up with all these new things happening and, why bother? But the answer is because we have to, because these things are important, because that's why we have to do it. And a couple, two of us both raised our hands and said, yeah, we are guilty of not remembering the proper pronouns, of accidentally misgendering people and having to apologize, and continue to work on that.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think acknowledging our faults is one of the hardest things we could ever do, because no one tells us how to do that. No one teaches us to do that. Very few people model that, but it takes so much strength and courage to acknowledge where we dropped the ball and then work to improve it in the future. So really, really grateful for you sharing that. I know Rachel has her hand up next.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks so much. I said I wouldn't talk, but here I am, because we had a similar discussion in our breakout room about like staying up to date on terminology and how it can feel like defeating to be like, oh my gosh, there's so much like coming at me, but it's also really energizing to be able to learn those words. And one thing I was saying like in the last like 30 seconds is part of what energizes me about learning new language, learning more inclusive language, is knowing that, even though we might be hearing these, and I say like for myself, like even if I'm hearing a term or a word for the first time, it's a word or a phrase that speaks to someone's experience that has been felt for generations. I had a conversation recently as part of the queer community about, all the different letters in the rainbow, and how all of these new terms are coming up. And I think when I hear them, as part of the community, I'm so excited that people are being like invited to name their identities and feel empowered and feel, nope, that's me. And that identity matters to me. And I'm really excited about that, because I didn't have that growing up. And to think like, that kids today are going to have that, that's fantastic. And I don't know if you can tell by my picture, I was growing up pretty recently. So it's cool. It's really cool to see. And I feel energized about it.
I'm energized to hear that, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's an incredible takeaway. I think Chris also responded and said, very motivating to remind myself that my learning is small relative to others' pain or lack of belonging. And I think that that's such a special, important thing to think about. I also wanted to share a brief story. Last week, I was recently at a LEAP retreat with my team, and it was awesome. It was our first ever annual retreat. We loved it. And at one point, I was out on the porch talking with an intern and Michaela, who's also here on this call, my amazing team member. And we were having these incredible, deep, complex conversations about identity and diversity and all of these things in so many ways. And it literally blew my mind in the most positive way. And then I realized the reason we're able to have this incredible connected conversation to all these depths is because we have the language to do so. If we didn't have these words, these terminologies, these identities, these phrases, we wouldn't be able to dive that deep and thus connect that deeply, right? So language also breeds this deep connection with one another. And that kind of hit me in a very powerful way that I'd never thought about before. So I also wanted to share that with this group. Okay, I know that we have one more hand up. Beatrice, would you like to share?
Yes. What I shared with my group was, I feel the pressure because I'm a DI professional that I should get this, I should know this, etc. And I do want to share, and I didn't get to share the group, but with folks here, not too long ago, I did 2 implicit bias workshops with our graduate students. And this was in the past 4 weeks. And mind you, both times I was corrected in public about what I missed in terms of any of the slide that I had or an image that I put. They corrected me in front of everyone. And for me, oh my goodness, that was very nerve-wracking. But I said, you know what? You're right. Thank you. I missed that. And I'm going to use this as a learning opportunity. Thank you. So I said those 2 things. And for me, two different scenarios. But I was again corrected in public. And I'm sharing this with you is sometimes the fear of offending or being corrected is there. But once you just learn to say like, yes, and move on, it gets better. But also I share with you that even if I'm a DI professional, trust me, I make mistakes. And even in this implicit bias workshop that I've done multiple times, there will always be something and someone will correct me and I'll be like, thank you, that I missed. Thank you. So I share that with you that this is part of our learning and it's okay to make mistakes. And Look at me, I make mistakes too. Thank
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think what you're saying makes so much sense. Like, I actually don't think that you can be a DEI professional if you're not constantly learning and questioning and acknowledging faults, and what, like, that is the essence of this work, right? And that's, I think, what makes it so beautiful and magical in many ways as well. Vulnerability is strength, as Michaela just said. So yeah, really, really awesome stuff, everyone. So with that said, let's finish up. I want to do a final reminder of, remember that apologizing and taking accountability for any harm that you cause, even if you're well-intentioned, it's important to do. And it really goes a long way in helping people feel seen, heard, and just validated in their feelings. And you can do hard things, even though this stuff feels incredibly overwhelming at times. It's okay to be overwhelmed. You're a human being. What's not okay is to beat yourself up and to stop trying, right? We want to continuously try and keep getting better over time. And then finally, also remember that silence is violence, and it's perceived as violence by many individuals, especially those in historically marginalized groups. So it's very important that we acknowledge our privilege, that we interrupt microaggressions and exclusive, not inclusive, exclusive language when we see it, and really do our best to support one another in their learning processes as well. We are all consistently learning, and we need to meet each other where we're at with that gentle push of, we can always do better. So with that said, I want to ask one final question, and I would like for you to be able to unmute and share or put it in the chat box. What is your biggest takeaway from Lead's 2 Power of workshops and then this final debrief at MIT? What are your biggest takeaways? What are you leaving with? This is the last time we'll be talking for a while. So what are you taking with you as a result of this workshop series?
Just a deeper recognition of the power of language, like how powerful it is.
Some great comments in the chat box as well.
I'm going to make a statement. It's going to have sort of a religious undertone, but there's a belief that death and life are in the power of the tongue. And when we think about that we have the power to speak, death into someone's life or speak life into them by what we say and how we say it, it really does sort of hit home just how important language is. And I think this is what came out for me today, like the importance and the prominence and how we have to make every effort to do this work so that we can change and we can produce a culture and an environment that is not just inclusive, but is caring of others.
That's such a beautiful way to end today. Thank you so much for sharing that, and some other really great responses in the chat. Language is powerful, and the way we use it can help or hurt. We can breathe that life into other people and into spaces and communities as well. We have the power to change. It's okay that it's hard, and there's always more to learn. Well, basically, you are all rock stars. Thank you so much for such an awesome session. Now, I'm going to finish and close us out and also let you know what resources we have already geared up for you so you can keep this conversation going. So the first resource is we will be adding you to our monthly School News You Can Use educational newsletter with tips, tools, articles, videos, everything that you can imagine for free educational resources. We'll also be inviting you to join our exclusive Community Leaders Facebook group for anyone that's been trained by Lead in any capacity over the last 10 years. So it's a really awesome and dynamic community to be a part of. And then finally, we also have this really wonderful 40-page resource guide that has every lifeline and hotline you could imagine. Also resources specifically geared toward interrupting microaggressions, which I know somebody already mentioned earlier, and many of the other topics you want to learn more about. Look here first. We've done the work for you. It's all in a nice, easy place. just use what already exists. I'm going to post the link to get this resource and all the other ones in the chat box. You need to complete this link to get these resources and within 24 hours. So please do so. Also, please be honest in your evaluation. It helps me continuously improve myself as your instructor and as a DEI practitioner. With that said, thank you all so much for your time, mostly your vulnerability and your engagement. Vulnerability is power, and it really is inspirational to me to see MIT doing such incredible things with ICEO, and a big thanks to ICEO for having us. If you'd like to stay connected, please check out our social media. Please feel free to also email me or Michaela directly. She will put our emails in the chat box for you. And I will also be trying to respond to any additional questions you might have at this point, or you can actually input them in the evaluation form that you submit, and we will try to address them that way as well. With that said, thank you all so much and have a really awesome rest of the afternoon, friends.